that the government embarked on a vast censorship campaign by coercing big tech social media platforms in an attempt to eliminate a viewpoint from public discourse. You know, when you have a government-sanctioned monopoly like big tech, they are more susceptible to that kind of coercive communication from federal officials.
It didn't quite come out that what our clients were doing was disseminating accurate speech, that it was the government at the same time who was spreading a lot of untruths about COVID and other matters.
It is not the job of the government, and it never has been, to police the line between true speech and false speech. That's simply not what the First Amendment allows the government to do.
It's a busy day for the Supreme Court. Justices are hearing arguments in the case brought by a pair of Republican attorneys general against the Biden administration, which alleges unconstitutional censorship by the government in combating COVID-19 misinformation. And updates in a trio of Trump legal cases. Breaking news this morning, former President Trump's lawyers say he can't secure a bond to cover the millions of dollars due in the New York civil case. What comes next for Trump? And in Fulton County, Georgia, prosecutor Nathan Wade is out after a judge called on him or DA Fani Willis to step aside over their romantic relationship. What's Willis's next move as she leads one of the most high-profile cases against the former president? And the hush money case. A judge last week delayed the trial until mid-April. Could we see a verdict before the November elections? Here to break down all this and more is Bob McWhirter, a constitutional law expert and criminal defense and civil rights lawyer. Bob, thank you so much for joining us. Let's start at the Supreme Court, where there's that fascinating case involving the Biden administration, vaccine misinformation, and claims of censorship. The Republican attorneys general of Missouri and Louisiana sued the Biden administration back in 2022, accusing the government of unconstitutional censorship when it tried to curb COVID-19 misinformation online. Now, arguments happened today, and The Hill is out with new reporting just a few minutes ago that says the Supreme Court looks likely to reject the arguments from the attorneys general. What did you glean from today's arguments?
Well, this gets to the fundamental question about what are these platforms? Are these platforms just kind of the stage where speech happens, or are they actually purveyors of the speech? And that's a fascinating question. Reasonable minds can go on both sides on that. I think, though, that the posture of which these cases are being brought really cuts against the plaintiffs. Some of their claims about what actually the Biden administration did are a little bit over-exaggerated. This was a time of a national emergency. The government had an interest in getting correct information out and not perpetuating conspiracy theories. I'm not sure that in this context you can say or claim that the government is suppressing valid political speech versus just the goal of making sure people are safe during a pandemic. So what may kind of influence this is actually the times that this was occurring, which were in the middle of a worldwide pandemic of great and deadly proportions, which does allow government a little more leeway in this constitutional calculus. So that's kind of what I'd be looking for with this case.
Definitely a fascinating moment in American history right now, what we're going back to look at. I want to shift gears a little bit, though, to the Trump legal front. There was some breaking news this morning. The former president's lawyers discussed in a court filing that their client has been unable to get a bond to cover that $464 million he was ordered to pay in the New York civil fraud case. They called it a, quote, practical impossibility. Bob, tell us what exactly this means and what the implications here are.
Well, this has great implications. Practical impossibility. Look, Donald Trump has made his brand on having more money than God, and he can pay anything, and he doesn't need blah, 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 blah. What this says is two things. One is he doesn't have the cash on hand. Well, that's okay. People can understand that. But what it also says is he cannot find anybody to post a bond for him because he doesn't have enough collateral to cover that bond. So let's say you're charged with a crime and your parents post their house to make sure to post a bond for you. If you do not show up to court, for instance, then your parents lose their house, right? Because there's value in that asset and a bonding company will do this. Trump cannot find anybody to back him because he doesn't have enough worth to be able to collateralize what is essentially a loan. That's what a bond is. So another company would do it, and they post the bond, and they make a lot of money off those bonds. Bonds, bail bondsmen make a lot of money. This is a kind of a different type of bond in terms of the appeal. The reason why you have to have that bond is because in a large financial fraud case, during the time between the verdict and an appeal, some defendant could dissipate all the assets, so there's nothing left for the people to be made whole. So you have to post the bond. And what, again, is remarkable is not only does he not have the cash, he doesn't have the assets to get anybody to give him that kind of loan. And that tells you something about Donald Trump's real worth.
So let's stick on this point for a second, Bob. We know that Trump is in the midst of reworking the RNC to be very MAGA-oriented. I mean, we can look no further than the new co-chair of the RNC, his daughter-in-law, Lara Trump. How does Trump's takeover at the RNC in this moment play into these mounting legal entanglements, and especially looking at this New York civil case, the money that he owes and him trying to put up bond?
Well, it would be, I think, illegal for the RNC to use donor money to support a bond in what is essentially a private case of a private individual. Now, there's going to be a lot of hazy ground when it comes to a candidate's legal fees. And Trump is going to argue that his legal fees, because it's all this quote unquote political witch hunt, end quote. And so he's going to make all these claims. I'll tell you what, if I was a donor to the Republican cause, I would not want to be giving money to Donald Trump's legal fees. Most of these issues have nothing to do with his role as president or even as a candidate. Right. And it's very destructive to the Republican brand, quite frankly.
From New York to Georgia now, another Trump legal case, this one in Fulton County involving his efforts to overturn Biden's 2020 victory in the state. Nathan Wade, the Fulton County prosecutor who helped actually lead the case against Trump, he resigned on Friday, and that came after a judge called for him or Fulton County DA Fani Willis to step aside because of their romantic relationship. What does Wade's resignation mean for this entire case?
Well, I think ultimately it'll mean very little. I have to assume that there are other people on that prosecution team that can just pick up this right away. You can't base a prosecution on that with just one lawyer. You've got to have a team on this. And I would assume that there are people ready, willing, and able to pick up right where he left off and get this case forward. I think the judge's ruling was a little far. I mean, he found no impropriety, and he's making the ruling based on an appearance of impropriety, which is a little, I think, tenuous as a basis, but it should not affect the prosecution in the least.
Let's head back up to New York now. Another Trump legal entanglement, the hush money case in the Empire State. The judge overseeing that case delayed the trial until mid-April after new evidence was sent to the parties. Jury selection was supposed to begin a week from today on March 25th. That's now being pushed back. What kind of evidence, Bob, was included in this new tranche that caused a delay? Do we have any idea of what was in there?
No, I think it was a series of interviews and other things. The prosecution should have disclosed that earlier. And I think it's very unfortunate that they did not. What is going on here is judges, this judge in particular, are bending over backwards to give Trump and his team all the scope to mount a legitimate defense. Now, the interest of the Trump team is nothing more than delay, because that's his overall strategy for all of these, is to try to outweigh it. And then he thinks he's going to become president and dismiss everything or pardon himself or whatnot. But really, that was the basis for the delay, to give them the chance. The government should have disclosed it earlier, or rather the state of New York. They did not do so, and I don't think it's going to have a big effect on the trial overall, and the trial will go forward after they've had a chance to review that material.
Yeah, I think you hit the most important thing, delay, delay, delay. Big question now if we'll see a verdict in this before the November elections. We'll just have to wait and see. Bob McWhirter, constitutional law expert, thank you so much for joining us today.
My pleasure. We covered a lot.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, Boeing's problems continue to grow. Over the weekend, a United Airlines flight from San Francisco carrying 139 passengers landed in Oregon with a panel missing. While the airline has stated there was no indication of damage to the plane during the flight, Boeing continues to face mounting scrutiny after months of being plagued by near catastrophic issues. Back in January, a door-sized section blew off a Boeing 737 MAX 9 mid-flight, causing panic throughout the cabin and grounding all MAX 9s for several weeks. And then in February, an American Airlines flight heading to Madrid made an emergency landing in Boston after a windshield cracked shortly after it departed from Kennedy International in New York. Now, the Federal Aviation Administration conducted a quality control audit that found dozens of problems throughout Boeing's manufacturing process and one of its key suppliers, Spirit AeroSystems, saying it had found multiple instances where the companies failed to comply with manufacturing quality control requirements. Shifting gears now, do you feel that in the air? It's officially March Madness. The NCAA set brackets for the men's and women's tournament last night, kicking off, in my opinion, one of the best times of the year. For the men's bracket, defending champion UConn received a coveted 1 seed, along with University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill, University of Houston, and Purdue. Over on the women's side, Iowa, which is, of course, home to NCAA D1 scoring record holder Caitlin Clark, has a #1 seed, in addition to South Carolina, Texas, and USC. So the big questions: who's going all the way? Will we have a Cinderella story? Any upsets? Get your picks in. Tip-off for the first game Thursday afternoon. And that's it for today's Daily Debrief. I'm Mychael Schnell. Be sure to like, share, and subscribe to The Hill's YouTube channel, and come back here soon for the intersection between politics and policy.